"Get on your knees, you pathetic old hag." He thought he was breaking a helpless 49-year-old woman. But when he hammered a screwdriver through the one memory she held sacred, he didn't just cross a line. He declared war on the Queen, and ringleader of the most notorious biker organization in the country, the Iron Pilgrims. Welcome to Blissful Whispers, where we expose the truth. That was just the beginning. Before we unleash the storm, we need to know who's in our corner. Drop a comment right now with where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. And if you know Joe's revenge is going to be epic, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss a single second of this takedown. The rain, a signature of the South Philadelphia industrial stretch, lashed the grimy wire mesh windows of the Second Red. It was a Tuesday in October, and the world outside was a watercolor of rust and wet concrete. The shop itself was a pocket of forgotten time, wedged between a boarded-up check-cashing joint and a bodega whose neon sign just flickered air. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper, bitter coffee from a perpetually lukewarm pot, and the unmistakable, quiet desperation of a place on the brink of collapse. Behind the counter, buried in the shadows of a failing fluorescent light, was Joanna Jo Harding. At 49, Jo was a woman who had perfected the art of appearing invisible. Her shoulders were set in a permanent slump, a physical apology for the space she occupied. Her drab, graying-brown hair was pulled back in a way that was neither neat nor messy, just absent. She wore a faded flannel shirt, 2 sizes too big, and shuffled rather than walked, her worn sneakers whispering across the warped floorboards. She was the human embodiment of her shop, tired, overlooked, and waiting to be demolished. The bell above the ancient door didn't just jingle. It slammed against the glass, an acoustic assault that made the dusty shelves tremble. Jo flinched, a practiced, mousy little jump. The air, already damp, turned cold. 3 figures filled the doorway, blocking the weak afternoon light. The one in the center swaggered in, shaking the rain from his expensive leather jacket. This was Milo Mickey Kozak. At 25, he was a walking collection of insecurities, masked by his father's money and a sneer that never left his face. He was flanked by 2 beefy shadows who looked like they'd been carved from spoiled meat, their cheap cologne battling the smell of old books and losing. "This place is a graveyard, Joe," Mickey announced, his voice too loud for the small space. He ran a hand through his meticulously gelled hair. "Seriously, who even reads this crap anymore?" His eyes landed on a small handwritten sign on the counter. "Free coffee with any purchase." He laughed, a wet, sharp sound devoid of humor. "What, you trying to give this poison away now?" Jo didn't look up. Her hands, visible below the counter, were nervously polishing the same spot on the worn laminate. Can I help you find something, Milo?" Her voice was thin, a reedy whisper. Mickey's sneer widened. He loved that. He loved the fear. He loved that she used his proper name like a servant. "Nah. I'm just here for the atmosphere." He sauntered over to a cardboard box near the door marked Community Donations. It was half full of children's books and old paperbacks. He stared at it for a second, then, with a casual, brutal motion, he kicked it. The box exploded. Curious George skidded across the floor, and a copy of The Velveteen Rabbit landed face down in a puddle of muddy water tracked in by Mickey's own boots. "Oops," he chuckled. His 2 goons laughed with him, a low, rumbling echo. "Clean it up, Joe," Mickey ordered, pointing at the mess with the toe of his designer sneaker. "You're old news and this dump is next. My old man's gonna own this whole block by Christmas." The threat hung in the air, thick and toxic. Jo Harding shuffled out from behind the counter. Her head was bowed. Her entire body language screamed surrender. She quietly knelt, her knees cracking in the silence, and began to pick up the scattered books. Her hands, when they reached for a soggy copy of Where the Wild Things Are, were visibly trembling. Mickey leaned down, getting close to her face. She smelled of soap and old paper, and it disgusted him. "You hear me, old woman? Sell now. It's the only good move you got left." Jo nodded, her hair falling to hide her face. I hear you, Milo." Satisfied, Mickey stood up and clapped one of his goons on the shoulder. "Come on. I'm bored. Let's go get some real food." They turned and swaggered out, slamming the door hard enough to make a few paperbacks fall from a nearby shelf. The bell's frantic jangling was the only sound left. Jo remained kneeling on the floor for a full 10 seconds after they left. The shop was silent again, save for the rain and the buzz of the dying light. Then the performance ended. The trembling in her hands stopped instantly. Her spine, which had been curved in a question mark of defeat, snapped ramrod straight. She slowly lifted her head. And the eyes that stared at the muddy book in her hand were not weary. They were not frightened. They were cold, clear, and utterly calm. While her body had been playing the part of the beaten-down shopkeeper, her mind, the real Joe, had been doing what it always did. It was cataloging. Milo Mickey Kozak. 25, 5'10", 175 pounds. Arrogant, loud, overcompensating. Pathological need for approval. The weak link. No immediate threat. Goon 1. Brick. 6'2", 240. Ex-boxer, cauliflower left ear. Favors his right leg. A heavy breather. Predictable brawler. Carries a concealed blade in his left boot. Sloppy. Goon 2. Slug. 6 foot, 230. Slower. Eyes were darting, looking for cameras, not exits. The smart one. Noticeable bulge at his right hip. A small caliber pistol, poorly concealed. Amateur. Her mind, a high-speed tactical computer, had calculated the entire encounter before Mickey had even finished his first sentence. She had identified 17 potential weapons within her reach. A heavy glass paperweight, the hot coffee pot, a metal letter opener, the steel leg of the counter stool. It would have taken her, she calculated, 12 seconds to neutralize all 3 of them. 14 if she wanted to be quiet about it. Joe Harding, the invisible woman, slowly stood up. The slouch was gone. Her movements were now economical and precise. She picked up the Velveteen Rabbit and looked at the muddy footprint on its cover. A flicker of something ancient and dangerous passed through her eyes. Mickey Kozak thought he was tormenting a helpless old woman. He thought he was the predator clearing out the weak. He had no idea that he'd just spent the last 5 minutes poking a phantom. He had no idea what kind of monster he was trying to evict. And he had no idea what he had just started. Joe locked the front door of the second red. The clack of the heavy deadbolt echoed with finality in the empty, darkening shop. She didn't look at the mess of books Mickey had kicked. She simply moved past it, a shadow ascending the creaking staircase to the small apartment above. The apartment was her cocoon, but not a comfortable one. It was sparse, almost monastic. A single bed neatly made. A small table with 2 chairs. A functional kitchenette. There were no photos, no trinkets, no clutter. It was the living space of a person who didn't plan to exist. She stood in the center of the room, the sounds of the rain and the distant sirens of South Philly filtering in. And then the transformation began. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic shift, but a reclamation. The defeated slump of her shoulders evaporated, her spine aligning with the rigidity of a steel rod. The tired, weary shuffle was gone, replaced by a calibrated, silent grace. Her eyes, which had been downcast and vacant, now lifted, and they were sharp, clear, and hyper-aware, taking in the entire room in a single, sweeping glance. She moved to the kitchenette, her motions fluid and precise. She wasn't making tea, she was executing a programmed task. Every movement was an economy of force. This was Agent Ghost. Among the analysts and handlers at Langley, Ghost was a legend, a phantom whispered about in briefings. She was the CIA's premier deep-cover specialist, a method actor of espionage. She didn't just play a role, she became it, infiltrating terror cells, drug cartels, and rogue states by burying her true self so deep it almost ceased to exist. For nearly 2 decades, she had been the agency's most effective and terrifying human weapon. She sat at the table, cradling the warm mug, and stared at a blank wall, her mind replaying her last briefing. The scene materialized in her memory. A windowless, fluorescent-lit room in Langley. Her handler, Croft, a man in his 50s whose ill-fitting suit and bureaucratic demeanor screamed middle management, paced in front of a digital screen. "This is a milk-run Ghost," Croft had said, not even making eye contact, his focus on his tablet. "A win down. You earned it after Istanbul." On the screen, a portfolio flashed. Target, Alexander Kozak. A photo showed a man in his 60s, impeccably dressed, stepping out of a black sedan. He was sophisticated, with cold, intelligent eyes. Patriarch of the Kozak organization. He's untouchable, old school. But he's getting sloppy. The screen changed to an architectural rendering of the massive, state-funded revitalization of the Philadelphia Navy Yard. Kozak's construction firm won the primary contract. The project is his piggy bank. We have solid intel he's using the container traffic and his access to the deep water port as a front for a massive smuggling operation. We don't know what he's moving, but it's big. Croft finally looked at her, his expression one of mild annoyance. We just need eyes, Ghost. The building you'll own overlooks the main access road to the port. Go be a sad, invisible little bookstore owner. Go bankrupt slowly. Blend in with the urban decay. Just watch, listen, and report. 6 months tops. Do not make waves. Back in the apartment, Jo took a sip of tea. Her lip curled in a silent sneer. A milk run. A fly on the wall. After Istanbul, where she had dismantled an entire trafficking ring by posing as a warlord's concubine, this was an insult. She was a scalpel being used as a security camera. But the insult was precisely why she'd taken the assignment. The CIA thought they were giving her a rest. The truth was she needed this. She needed the anonymity. Because Ghost was also a lie. She set the mug down, her movement perfectly silent. She walked to a corner of the Spartan living room, to a section of floor that looked identical to every other. She knelt, pressed 2 fingers into the seams between the floorboards and lifted. A small, hydraulic hinge side as a hidden compartment was revealed. It wasn't CIA issued. There was no government tech. Inside, nestled on black velvet, lay 2 items. The first was a hardened, encrypted satellite phone, a model the agency didn't even know existed. The second was a pristine, leather-backed patch. She picked it up. The leather was thick, the stitching perfect. It depicted a stylized iron compass rose, its points sharp as daggers, entwined by a coiled serpent. Around the edge, in stark, silver lettering, were the words, Iron Pilgrims MC. And above the compass, in a separate rocker, was a single, stark title, Prez. This was her third and truest face. Not Jo, not Ghost. This was Prez, the founding and current leader of the Iron Pilgrims. They weren't a gang. They were an organization. A disciplined, sprawling brotherhood with chapters in 30 states, all answering to one unseen, unknown leader. She had built this empire from scratch, a formidable autonomous power operating in the shadows of the nation. The CIA didn't know. They thought they'd recruited a brilliant but damaged operative 20 years ago. They had no idea they'd brought a sitting monarch into their ranks. This mission, this sabbatical as Jo Harding, wasn't for them. It was for her. The crushing weight of leading her own formidable underworld, the betrayals, the power, the constant threat, the blood, it had become too much. She needed a break. She needed to be no one just for a little while, to remember what silence felt like. Jo traced the silver stitching of the patch with her thumb. The quiet was over. This arrogant parasite, Mickey Kozak, had just kicked the hornet's nest. He thought he was tormenting a helpless old woman. He had no idea he was trying to extort the most dangerous woman on the entire East Coast. The next escalation came 3 days later. Jo arrived at dawn to find the front of the second red violated. The faded, striped canvas awning, which offered the only hint of cheer on the block, had been slashed to ribbons. It hung in sad, limp strips, flapping in the damp morning breeze. And across her front windows, in crude, dripping red spray paint, was a simple, unambiguous message: get out. Mickey's work was as sloppy as his tradecraft. Jo stood on the sidewalk, a bag of stale bagels in her hand. The Jo Harding persona would have crumpled, cried, or called the police. Agent Ghost did none of those things. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes were cold and methodical. She was documenting, analyzing. The paint was cheap, the nozzle work amateurish. He was angry, in a hurry, and wanted to be seen. She pulled a burner phone from her pocket, the kind with no smart features, and meticulously photographed the damage. She captured the angle of the spray paint, the specific cuts in the canvas, the footprints left in the damp grime near the window. Each photo was a piece of evidence, uploaded instantly to a secure CIA server. She then initiated a secure call. Her handler, Croft, picked up on the third ring. His voice was already tired, as if her call was an inconvenience. Ghost. What? Escalation in harassment, target son. Level 2 vandalism. Public defacement, property destruction. Requesting advisement, Jo stated, her voice flat, all emotion scrubbed from it. A heavy sigh came through the encrypted line. Advisement? Clean it up, Ghost. What do you want me to do? Send a diplomatic note. This is a C-level target's idiot kid acting out. It's background noise. Joe's eyes narrowed. The profile suggests he's unstable and escalating. He's testing boundaries. A non-response could be interpreted as weakness and invite further aggression. Then let it, Croft snapped, his bureaucratic patience gone. You're a ghost, remember? You're a hole in the world. You're supposed to be a victim. So be one. You're not there to teach the local bully a lesson. You're there to watch a shipping lane. Your orders are to observe, report, and not make waves. This is a milk run, Ghost. Don't complicate it. Eat the harassment. The line went dead. Joe stared at the phone. Eat the harassment. He was a bureaucrat, safe behind a government desk, telling a field agent to simply absorb the assault. He was part of a broken, indifferent system, one that protected powerful, corrupt men like Alexander Kozak and enabled their entitled spawn like Mickey. Croft, safe behind his government desk, tells her to eat the harassment. He's part of a broken system that protects bullies like Mickey Kozak. Mickey thinks he can destroy a person's livelihood just because he has power. If you're sick of entitled bullies and the corrupt systems that protect them, hit that like button right now. Don't let the Mickeys of the world win. Joe spent the next 2 hours meticulously scrubbing the red paint from her windows. She did it in plain sight, projecting the perfect image of a terrified, defeated woman trying to hold her life together. She saw Mickey's car, a black BMW with obnoxious rims, cruise by twice. He was watching, expecting tears, maybe a for sale sign. He got neither. And her compliance, her silence, was a greater provocation than any resistance. It infuriated him. Mickey had expected her to break. He'd told his father the old hag would be gone by the weekend. But she just cleaned it up. She was still there. That night, fueled by cheap whiskey and a stinging rebuke from Alexander about failing to handle a simple old woman, Mickey decided to end it. He wasn't just going to scare her. He was going to violate her. He waited until 3 a.m. when the rain returned, masking all sound. The lock on her apartment side door was a joke. He picked it in under 10 seconds, his heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and booze. He stepped inside. The air was still. His footfalls were loud on the old wooden floors. "Joe," he whispered, a taunt to the darkness. "Time to talk, old lady." He flipped the light switch. The apartment's stark emptiness hit him like a physical blow. It was unnerving. No TV, no clutter, no jewelry, no life. Just a bed, a table, 2 chairs. It was like a cell. He threw open the closet, a few drab shirts, 2 pairs of pants. He ripped open the drawers. Nothing. He was furious. He couldn't even rob her. She had nothing. This wasn't a home, it was a ghost's way station. He was about to leave, his frustration peaking, when his foot kicked something on the floor by the bed, hidden in the shadow of the nightstand. He bent down. It was a simple, cheap wooden frame that had been knocked over. He picked it up. It was a photograph. A woman who was unmistakably a younger Joe, maybe 20 years ago. Her face was bright, unguarded, and she was laughing. A wide, brilliant smile he couldn't possibly reconcile with the mousy woman downstairs. Her arm was slung around a man with dark, kind eyes, who was laughing right back at her. They were squinting against a bright, brutal sun, a sun that didn't exist in South Philly. They looked happy. This was it. In this sterile, empty life, this was the one thing. The one personal, human item in the entire apartment. Mickey stared at the man's smiling face, and all his own inadequacy and rage focused into a single needlepoint of pure reptilian cruelty. He didn't just smash it. He took it. The next morning, Joe came down the stairs, her mind already on the day's routine. Watch the access road, log the container trucks, sell no books. She stopped on the last step. The morning light from the front windows was different. She walked to the front door of the shop, and the world stopped. It was tacked to the wooden door at her precise eye level. The frame. Mickey had used a heavy-gauge 6-inch screwdriver to pin it to the door. He had driven it straight through the center of the photograph, obliterating the glass and nailing Leo's laughing face to the wood. The glass was a spiderweb of jagged cracks. The point of the screwdriver had torn through the image, a brutal, final act of desecration. Joe didn't breathe. She didn't move. The bustling sound of the morning street, the distant rumble of trucks, the smell of coffee, it all evaporated. Her entire universe collapsed to this single, obscene point of violation. This was not the CIA's mission. This was not Croft's background noise. This was not Mickey Kozak, the insecure bully. This was a catastrophic, fatal error. The emotional firewalls Joe had meticulously constructed for 2 decades, the walls that separated Joe the victim from Ghost the agent, from Prez the leader, didn't just crumble. They were annihilated. They flash-fused into a single, cohesive, white-hot entity. Her hand, the one that had trembled for Mickey, rose. It was perfectly, terrifyingly steady. She wrapped her fingers around the handle of the screwdriver. Her knuckles went white. With a single, violent rip, she tore it from the wood, the sound of splintering timber echoing in the dead-silent shop. She looked at the ruined photo in her hand, at the man she had lost twice. The Joe Harding persona was dead, burned away in an instant. The ghost was offline, her mission irrelevant. There was only Prez. And this was no longer a mission. It was a personal war. The lock on the front door of the second red didn't just click, it exploded. The old wood splintered as a heavy boot kicked it open, slamming the door against the interior wall so hard a dozen paperbacks jumped from their shelves. Joe, who had been quietly cataloging her inventory in the dark, didn't flinch. She simply remained still, a shadow among shadows. Mickey Kozak entered, but not with the swagger of his previous visits. This was different. This was a procession. He was flanked by 6 men, not the 2 amateurs from before. These were larger, harder, and they moved with a grim purpose. They fanned out, blocking all exits, their heavy boots thudding on the floorboards. They were armed openly. Lead pipes. Aluminum bats. One man carried a thick, knotted length of tow chain. They weren't here to intimidate. They were a demolition crew. Mickey sauntered to the center of the room, his expensive jacket hanging open. In one hand he carried a small red jerrycan. In the other a single highway road flare. "Last call, Joe," Mickey sneered, his voice echoing with false confidence in the cramped space. The smell of his crew, cheap booze, sweat, and damp leather, filled the air. Joe remained behind the counter, the Joe Harding mask firmly in place. Her shoulders were hunched. Her head was down. She looked, for all the world, like a trapped animal. "Sign the building over," Mickey continued, sliding a single crumpled piece of paper across the counter. "My father's holding company. Sign it, and we let you walk away with whatever junk you can carry." Joe's voice was a barely audible whisper. "Please, Milo, this is all I have. I'm not asking." Mickey's voice dropped, the insecure boy replaced by a bad imitation of his father. He placed the jerrycan on the counter. "I'm telling you, you're done." He popped the plastic cap off the road flare with his thumb. "You sign or we torch this dump. With you in it." This was it. The final, fatal line. Joe didn't respond. She didn't beg. She just stared at the piece of paper. Her silence enraged him. "You deaf, you old hag?" I said. He struck the flare's cap. A violent hiss erupted, and a blinding chemical red light flooded the dark bookstore, painting the walls in demonic shades of red and black, casting long, monstrous shadows. Mickey held the sputtering, furious light for a moment, enjoying the power. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it onto the pile of donated books near the counter, the same ones he had kicked just days before. The paper curled, blackened, and then whoosh, a hungry orange flame erupted, climbing the pile with horrifying speed. This was the imminent, credible threat. The legal and moral tripwire. It was no longer extortion. It was attempted arson. Attempted murder. The flames reflected in Joe's eyes. Last chance. Mickey yelled over the crackle of the fire. And in that instant, Joe Harding vanished. The trembling in her hands stopped. The pathetic slump in her shoulders evaporated as her spine snapped ramrod straight. She lifted her head and the tired, defeated eyes were gone. In their place was something ancient, cold, and utterly neutral. It was the look of a predator that had just been given permission to hunt. Mickey saw the shift. His sneer faltered, melting into confusion. "What?" Joe's voice, when it came, was not Joe Harding's. It was clear, calm, and resonated with an authority that vibrated in the air. "You just made a fatal error." The clock started. The thug closest to her, the one with the tow chain, lunged. "Hey, the bitch is..." Seconds 1 to 4. Joe was already in motion. She grabbed the heavy-duty 15-pound steel fire extinguisher from its mount behind the counter. She didn't spray it. She pivoted on her heel, swinging the canister in a low, brutal arc. It connected not with his body but with his lead knee. The sound was not a thud. It was a wet, sickening pop of shattering bone, tendon, and cartilage. The man screamed, a high, thin shriek that was cut short as he collapsed. Seconds 5 to 9. A second thug, Brick from the first visit, charged, raising his lead pipe. Joe dropped the extinguisher, her motion flowing seamlessly. She was inside his guard before the pipe had reached the apex of its swing. Her left hand shot out, not in a punch but as a rigid blade, striking the cluster of nerves in his armpit. His arm went dead, the pipe clattering harmlessly. Her right hand, hardened, simultaneously struck his throat. He gagged, a sickening, gurgling sound, and crumpled to his knees, clawing at his crushed larynx. Seconds 10 to 15. Two more attacked from the front, a bat and a pipe, swinging wide. They were expecting a brawler. They met a phantom. Joe ducked under the bat swing, grabbing a thick, heavy hardback copy of Moby Dick from the counter display. She didn't throw it. She used it as a weapon, driving the spine of the 800-page book straight up, under the first man's jaw. His teeth clacked together with the force of a bear trap. His eyes rolled back. He was unconscious before he hit the floor. Seconds 16 to 22. The Moby Dick attacker slumped, momentarily blocking the pipe-wielding thug. Joe grabbed an antique wooden reading chair, a solid oak piece, and slammed it against a steel support beam. It shattered. She was left holding one of the thick, broken legs. The fifth thug, seeing his friends go down, hesitated, his eyes wide with disbelief. It was the last mistake he'd make. Joe lunged at him, a blur of motion. The oak leg moved with blinding speed. Crack, a shattered wrist, the bat clattered away. Crack, a broken elbow. Crack, his collarbone. He folded like a cheap suit, neutralized. Seconds 23 to 27. The sixth and final man was frozen in pure, animal terror. He looked at the carnage, his friends groaning, gurgling, and broken on the floor. He looked at the small fire. And he looked at the woman standing in the center of it all. He dropped his pipe. "I'm out." He turned to run. Joe vaulted over the counter with the fluid agility of a panther. She was on his back before he took 2 steps, one forearm looping under his chin, her bicep locking against his carotid artery. A perfect, bloodless rear-naked choke. He struggled for 3 seconds, his feet drumming on the floor, then went limp, unconscious. The clock stopped. 27 seconds. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the agonized whimpering of the man with the shattered knee. Joe stood in the center of the room, breathing calmly. Her hair was slightly mussed. Otherwise she was untouched. The only other person standing was Mickey Kozak. He was paralyzed by the counter, his face a mask of pale, clammy disbelief. The jerrycan of lighter fluid slipped from his numb fingers, thudding onto the floor. He looked at his entire crew disabled. He looked at the old woman. Who are you?" he stammered, his voice cracking. Joe calmly walked past him, grabbed the fire extinguisher she dropped, and put out the fire with a short, efficient PSHT of white foam. She turned to face him, her eyes as cold as the grave. And as she surveyed the scene, her tactical mind already calculating the next 10 moves, her gaze drifted past Mickey, past the shattered door, and across the rain-slicked street. She saw it. A small, black dome mounted on the corner of the bodega. A new model, high-definition security camera. Its tiny, telltale red recording light was on. It had a perfect, unobstructed, high-angle view of her entire shop's interior. It had just recorded a 49-year-old, helpless bookstore owner meticulously and brutally dismantle 6 armed men in under 30 seconds. The entire brutal ballet was caught. That was pure, calculated self-defense against a credible, deadly threat. But now, the very system that failed to protect her is going to try and chew her up for it. If you believe every single person has the right to defend themselves from violent animals like Mickey's crew, subscribe right now. Only people who side with the bullies would ignore this. The internet moves faster than blood. Before the first police siren had even neared her street, the footage was already online. The bodega owner, Mr. Kim, who despised Mickey Kozak more than he feared his father, had anonymously leaked the high-definition security footage to a notorious Philly crime blogger. The blogger titled it, "South Philly Bookstore Owner Goes Full John Wick on 6 Armed Thugs." It was a nuclear explosion. By 2 a.m. it had 1 million views. By 4 a.m. it was at 10 million, trending worldwide. #BookstoreBadass was the #1 hashtag on Twitter. The grainy, high-angle footage was a brutal masterpiece. It was undeniable. It showed 6 men entering with weapons. It showed Mickey light a fire. And it showed Joe dismantle them with the cold, terrifying efficiency of a predator. People were hailing her as a hero, a vigilante icon, a symbol of the fed-up working class. But 300 miles away in a sterile, glass-walled penthouse office overlooking Manhattan's Central Park, Alexander Kozak was not watching the viral blog post. He was watching the raw 4K security feed, which his personal team had acquired from the bodega's server an hour ago. He sipped a tiny cup of black espresso, his face illuminated only by the massive monitor. He was not angry. He was intrigued. He watched the 27-second clip. He watched it again. He slowed it to 25% speed. His foolish, impulsive son saw a street fight. Alexander saw something else entirely. He wasn't watching the violence, he was watching the technique. He watched the way she pivoted, transferring 100% of her weight into the fire extinguisher, aiming not at the chest, a brawler's move, but at the knee, a disabling move. He watched the blade hand strike to the throat, not a punch but a precise, anatomical attack. He watched the absolute lack of hesitation, the perfect economy of motion. There was no wasted energy, no fear, no anger. Just work. "This is not a shopkeeper," Alexander whispered to the empty, silent room. His voice was calm with a faint Eastern European accent. "This is tradecraft." He'd seen that specific, blindingly fast disarm and strike sequence once before 20 years ago, in an underground garage in Istanbul. It had been used by a rival's bodyguard, an operative rumored to be ex-Spetsnaz. His entire calculation shifted. This Joe Harding wasn't a problem to be bulldozed. She was a professional, hiding in his son's backyard. His son hadn't just poked a bear. He had, with catastrophic incompetence, poked a ghost. Alexander Kozak did not get rich using brute force. He got rich by owning the system. He pressed a single button on his console. "Give me Arthur Rothman. Wake him up. Get our media team in a full-spin conference in 1 hour. And get my son. Find him, sedate him, and put him in a wheelchair at Mercy Hospital. Now." He canceled his order for a cleanup crew to visit the bookstore. He was switching weapons. You don't send thugs to fight a phantom. You send the world. The counteroffensive began at 5 a.m. It was brilliant. It was surgical. A press conference was held on the pristine, floodlit steps of a private hospital. Arthur Rothman, Kozak's $2,000 an hour lawyer, all polished venom and righteous indignation, stood at a bank of microphones. Behind him, weeping women, the mothers of the men Joe had neutralized, were comforted by hospital staff. "What we saw on the internet last night was not heroism," Rothman declared, his voice booming with outrage. "It was a vicious, hateful, and unprovoked assault on 6 young men. 6 local businessmen. And then, the masterstroke. Mickey Kozak was wheeled out. He was a portrait of victimhood. His arm was in a pristine white sling. A small, artfully applied bandage was visible on his forehead. He looked pale, terrified, and he was crying. Rothman spun the narrative. Mickey, a passionate young investor, was simply visiting Ms. Harding to politely discuss a generous, above-market value offer to relocate her failing business, a key part of his community revitalization project. He was met, Rothman thundered, not with discussion but with a torrent of anti-development classist hate, and then this barbaric, premeditated violence. The fire? It was a self-inflicted diversion by Ms. Harding to cover her unhinged assault. They released the medical reports to the press. A shattered patella, a crushed larynx, multiple concussions, a fractured skull. These are life-altering injuries. The media devoured it. The bookstore badass narrative was replaced by 9 a.m. The new headlines were stark. Bookstore barbarian, vigilante rampage in South Philly. She tried to kill my son, says mother of injured man. Community leader Mickey Kozak viciously assaulted. Joe, now a fugitive, watched the local news from inside a dark, stolen car 2 blocks away. She saw her own face, her driver's license photo, plastered on the screen under the word "wanted." The online comments, her former cheering section, had turned vicious. "Wow, she went way too far. Those guys are in the ICU. The video is grainy, you can't even see their weapons. She's a monster." Mickey Kozak has been trying to fix that neighborhood for years. She's probably just some unhinged psycho. Alexander Kozak's astroturfing campaign was a tidal wave of manufactured outrage. In 12 hours he had transformed her from a folk hero into the city's most hated villain. The police weren't just looking for her. They were leading a city-wide manhunt for a dangerous, violent fugitive. Alexander Kozak just twisted the truth with nothing but money and power. He's counting on you to be stupid. He's counting on you to believe his lies and condemn an innocent woman. Comment, "I see the truth," below if you're not falling for the spin. Show the world you can't be manipulated by parasites like him. The city had become a trap. Every intersection felt like a crosshair, every passing siren a direct threat. Jo was a ghost, but now she was a hunted one. She dumped the stolen sedan 5 miles from the shop and was now in the deep, echoing darkness beneath an I-95 overpass. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of tires on the joints above was a maddening drumbeat, counting down the seconds. Rain hammered down in sheets, turning the gravel lot into a field of mud. She sat in the back of a rusted, abandoned delivery van, the air thick with the smell of mildew and defeat. Her face, illuminated by the cold blue light of a new burner phone, stared back at her from a news website. Wanted, Joanna Harding. Armed and extremely dangerous. This was the protocol. When the world ends, you follow the steps. Panic is a luxury you can't afford. She was cornered, boxed in by Kozak's lies and a citywide APB. She pulled the SIM from the burner phone and snapped it in half. She then reached into the lining of her boot and pulled out a third device, a slim, featureless piece of black plastic. It wasn't a phone, it was an emergency beacon. One button, one number, one function. Get me out. She initiated the encrypted call. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a painful, frantic bird in a cage. This was the call no agent ever wants to make. The failure call. It connected. The line was silent, scrubbed of all static. "Ghost," she said, her voice low and steady, belying the storm inside her. Code, midnight Sunday, requesting immediate, emergency extraction. Cover is permanently compromised. Hostile forces, citywide manhunt. I am exposed. A beat of silence. Then Croft's voice came through the speaker. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even concerned. It was cold. Negative. Ghost. Joe's blood froze. The rain on the van's roof suddenly sounded deafening. Repeat. Handler. I am compromised. Kozak's organization and the entire Philadelphia PD are actively hunting. This is a priority 1 extraction. I heard you, Croft said, his tone flat as if discussing a requisition for office supplies. You went loud. You went viral, for Christ's sake. You turned a simple surveillance op into a 3-ring circus. You're a liability. It was a defensive action, Joe shot back, her control fraying. Imminent, credible threat to life. 6 hostiles, armed, attempted arson. The protocol is clear. Your job, Croft cut her off, his voice dropping, was to not be seen. Your job was to be a sad little woman watching trucks go by. You failed. Spectacularly. Croft, listen to me. No, you listen, he snapped. As of this moment, Langley is classifying you as burned and disavowed. Your access is revoked. Your file is sealed. You are officially on your own. Joe. He used her name. Not her call sign. Her name. A final, personal twist of the knife. Click. The line went dead. Joe stared at the black plastic in her hand. The silence in the van was absolute, a crushing, suffocating vacuum. The thrum of the highway above, the relentless rain, it all faded. She was no longer an agent. She was an unperson. A pariah to the public. A target for the mob. And now, a ghost abandoned by her own makers. She was utterly, completely alone. She closed her eyes, her mind, a machine trained for pattern recognition, spinning up, not in panic but in cold, ruthless analysis. The adrenaline from the fight faded, and in its place, a creeping, icy dread began to bloom in her stomach. It wasn't adding up. None of it. Question 1, Alexander Kozak. His countermove was too fast. Too perfect. He didn't just send thugs. He deployed a surgical, multi-million-dollar legal and media campaign in the dead of night. He had a prepackaged narrative, victims, and a corrupt hospital on standby. Oh. Question 2, the tradecraft. He recognized her. Oh. From Istanbul? A lucky guess across 20 years? Or was he told what to look for? Question 3. Mickey. The linchpin. A spoiled, incompetent, low-level bully. How did he find her? How did he know exactly which personal button to push? The photo of Leo. It was the one thing from her real past, her agency past. A file a low-level punk like Mickey could never, ever access. The pieces began to slide into place, forming a picture of such profound, sickening betrayal that Joe felt her stomach clench. Mickey found the photo because someone told him where her apartment was, how to get in, and exactly what was inside. Alexander recognized her tradecraft because someone gave him her file. Her psychological profile, her operational history, her weak points. Croft's voice on the call. Not surprised. Not disappointed. Cold. Calculated. You're on your own, Joe. The rain hammered the roof, each drop like a nail in a coffin. It wasn't incompetence. It wasn't bad luck. Croft dismissed the vandalism. Eat the harassment. He wasn't dismissing it, he was allowing it. He was letting the hyena get close. Croft sold her out. He fed her to Kozak. He leaked her file, her identity, her legend, all to Alexander Kozak. This wasn't a milk run. It wasn't a wind down. It was a setup. It was a termination order outsourced to the mob. She was a ghost the agency itself wanted to see buried, and they'd sent her to the one man in the country with the resources to do it. She wasn't a compromised agent. She was the target. Joe opened her eyes in the pitch black of the van. The fear was gone. The shock was gone. All that was left was a pure, cold, clarifying fury. The hunter had just realized she was the prey. And now she was well and truly off the leash. The wail of a siren, sharp and close, finally sliced through the roar of the I-95 overpass. They were sweeping the grid. The abandoned van was no longer safe. Joe slid out of the rusted metal shell, melting back into the deluge. She moved with a purpose, not a panic, her mind a cold calculator. She slipped between two derelict warehouses, into a narrow, lightless alley choked with dumpsters and rotting pallets. The rain hammered down, turning the alley floor into a black, rushing stream. She reached the end. It was a trap. A 20-foot brick wall in front of her. A chain-link fence topped with glittering razor wire to her left. A perfect, three-sided kill box. The sirens were closer now, their Doppler wail bouncing off the brick, sounding like they were coming from everywhere at once. She leaned against the wet, gritty wall, the cold seeping through her jacket. This was it. The end of the line. Cornered by the city, hunted by the mob, and betrayed by her own agency. Croft's voice echoed in her head. You're on your own, Joe. He thought he'd cut her off. He thought he'd neutered her. He thought he'd left a disavowed agent to die in a gutter. Croft had made one fatal, arrogant mistake. He only knew about Ghost. He had no idea who he'd really just set loose. Joe ignored the useless CIA beacon in her boot. She reached into the lining of her other boot and pulled out the second device. The one that wasn't government issued. The hardened, encrypted satellite phone. It had one contact, one purpose. She pressed the call button. It didn't even ring a full second. The connection was instant, the line scrubbed clean by military-grade encryption. A voice answered. It wasn't a hello. It was a rumble of gravel and steel. Prez. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. A soldier acknowledging his commander. It was Breaker. Her national sergeant-at-arms. He didn't ask where she was. He didn't ask if she was okay. He was simply waiting for his orders. His voice was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. You just say the word. Joe closed her eyes. The sound of the approaching sirens, the hammering rain, the distant thunder, it all faded to a dull roar. The fear, the shock, the cold, it was all burned away by a pure, clarifying, white-hot fury. When she spoke, the reedy, thin voice of Joe Harding was gone. The cold, sterile tone of Agent Ghost was gone. This voice was iron. It was absolute authority. It was the sound of a monarch taking her throne. This was press. The word is war, she said, her voice a low, lethal monotone that cut through the storm. The Kozak organization in Philadelphia. The handler who burned me. I want all of them. I want the entire rotten structure torn down to the studs. A beat of silence on the other end. Not of hesitation. Of processing. Of a massive, unseen machine engaging its gears. Then Breaker's reply. We're already on our way. The line went dead. Joe lowered the phone. The sirens were deafening now, just on the other side of the warehouse. Blue and red lights flashed, painting the mouth of the alley in strobing, demonic colors. She was still trapped. She was still hunted. But she was no longer alone. Across the country, in a dozen states, phones were ringing. In roadhouses, in garages, in secure compounds, engines were roaring to life. A silent, disciplined, and lethally loyal army was mobilizing. The Iron Pilgrims were coming to Philadelphia. Croft and Kozak thought they were hunting a ghost. They had no idea they had just declared war on a queen. The city's law enforcement, fueled by Alexander Kozak's media campaign, was hunting a ghost. They were searching for a lone, deranged woman. They were looking in the wrong places for the wrong enemy. The real invasion of Philadelphia didn't arrive with sirens or flashing lights. It was a ghost army. It began as a subtle shift in the city's background noise. A dozen nondescript contractor vans, the kind with plumbing and heating logos peeling off the side, fanned out from the I-95 corridor. Men in grease-stained work jackets and steel-toed boots, looking like any other Philly construction crew, began appearing at corner coffee shops and bus stops, their eyes sharp, their movements economical. They were not a gang. They were an organization. The Iron Pilgrims didn't roll in with loud pipes and leather cuts. They infiltrated. They were mechanics, ex-military, logisticians, and shadow men, and they all answered to one authority. While the police were raiding homeless shelters and bus stations, the Pilgrims were executing a coordinated, multi-pronged decapitation strike. The first to vanish was Vinny, the suit Fanucci, Kozak's chief legal counsel and money launderer. He was snatched from the heated garage of his own high-rise condo, pulled into a black panel van so quickly and silently that his dropped briefcase was the only sign he'd ever been there. The second was Big Paulie Greco, Kozak's enforcer and Mickey's handler. He was lifted from his favorite booth at a 24-hour diner, a napkin simply dropped over his phone on the table. When the waitress returned with his coffee, the booth was empty. The third was Dmitry Volkov, Kozak's port liaison, the man who actually managed the big shipment. He was picked up while walking his dog in a leafy, suburban park. The dog was found tied to a bench, unharmed, whining. Dmitry was gone. Within 24 hours of the word being given, Kozak's entire inner circle was off the board. In a cold, cavernous, and secure warehouse, an Iron Pilgrim's black site in the industrial barrens, the three men were kneeling on a plastic tarp. Joe was there. But Joe was gone. Ghost was gone. This was press. She wore no cut, no patch. She didn't need to. Her authority was absolute, a palpable force in the room. Breaker, a mountain of quiet menace, stood behind her, his arms crossed. "I am not interested in your money," she said, her voice calm, addressing the three terrified, bound men. "I am not interested in your territory. I am here to dismantle your boss. One of you is going to tell me how." Vinny and Polly postured, threatened, and blustered. Prez ignored them, turning her full, undivided attention to Dmitry Volkov. He was the only one who looked genuinely terrified, not just angry. He was the technician, not the thug. "You," she said, "run the Navy Yard for him. You move his product. What is he moving tomorrow night?" Dmitry stammered, I don't know. It's medical equipment. MRIs. For the new city hospital. It's all legit." Prez looked at Breaker. Breaker took one step forward, grabbed Vinny, the suit Fanucci, by his $3,000 tie, and simply held him off the ground. Prez never took her eyes off Dmitry. "The manifest says, medical equipment." "That's a lie. I know it's a lie. You're going to tell me the truth." Dmitry, sweating, his eyes darting to Vinny's purple, choking face, began to crack. It's valuable. The most valuable thing he has. It's an asset." "What kind of asset?" Joe's voice was sharp as a razor. "A person." Dmitry finally screamed, the word tearing out of him. "It's a person. He's his personal assassin. His ghost. The one he uses when he can't trust anyone else. He's been holding him a prisoner for years. He's moving him tomorrow because the feds are sniffing around the hospital project." Joe's blood ran cold. A prisoner. An assassin. This changed the entire equation. "A name. Give me a name." I don't know." Dmitry sobbed. "They just call him Veles, after some old world god of death. He's not right. In the head. Brainwashed. A total phantom. Kozak's ultimate weapon. A name, Joe repeated, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Dmitri was weeping now, broken. I heard Kozak say it. What? Just once when he was drunk, boasting. He said Velis wasn't his real name. He said his real name was Leo. The word hit Joe like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The warehouse, the men, Breaker, it all vanished. Leo. Her partner. Her dead partner. The man in the photo. The man laughing with her in Bogota. The last, horrifying, devastating puzzle piece slid into place, rewriting her entire past. Bogota wasn't an ambush. It was a capture. Croft's betrayal, it didn't start last week. It started a decade ago. He didn't just sell her out. He sold Leo out first. And the photo. Mickey, the stupid, cruel bully, hadn't just found it. He was sent for it. The screwdriver through Leo's smiling face. It wasn't a random act of desecration. It was a message. A cold, calculated, deeply personal message from one Grandmaster, Alexander Kozak, to another. It wasn't a threat. It was a boast. It said, I have your most valuable piece. And I've known who you are all along. This changes everything. This was never about a mission. It was about family. Alexander and his traitorous crony Croft think they can torture and break a person's soul and get away with it. If you believe loyalty is everything and betrayal is the lowest vice, smash that like button for Leo. The Philadelphia Navy Yard was not a yard. It was a city-state, a sprawling fortress of post-industrial decay and cutting-edge redevelopment. It was a concrete labyrinth of massive, dark warehouses, decommissioned battleships sleeping in their berths, and miles of high-security fencing. Tonight, under a bruised, starless sky, it was a war zone. 2 miles from the target warehouse, a convoy of unregistered tow trucks and reinforced pickups sat in the darkness, engines rumbling. Breaker, a map of the yard glowing on a ruggedized tablet, gave the final order over his comms. All units. Phase 1 is green. Go loud. And I mean loud. The feint began not as an attack but as an apocalypse. The first explosion was a stolen, propane-filled construction vehicle, detonated against the main security checkpoint. The blast was monumental, a blooming orange flower that lit up the entire south side of the city and sent a shockwave rattling across the water. Before the shrapnel had even stopped falling, Breaker and 24 iron pilgrims, mounted on stripped-down, roaring dirt bikes and heavy choppers, burst through the flaming wreckage. They were a vision of chaos, a storm of noise and light, firing flares into the air and dragging sparking chains. Kozak's private security force, a small army of ex-military contractors, reacted exactly as predicted. Alarms blared. Searchlights snapped on, frantically sweeping the darkness. Every available man was scrambled to intercept the massive frontal assault at the main gate. The yard descended into chaos. And a mile away on the silent black water of the Delaware River, Joe and her infiltration team surfaced. The water was ice. It stole the breath, a physical, crushing cold. She, Wraith, her ex-Delta Force pilgrim, and 3 other hand-picked specialists were clad in black, amphibious gear, their faces streaked with camo paint. They emerged from the river's current under the shadow of Pier 27, an ancient, rotting structure that led directly to the back of their target, Warehouse 27. All guards are drawn to the feint, Wraith whispered into his throat mic, his eyes on the warehouse roof. Perimeter's dark. We're clear to climb. While Breaker's team was a symphony of explosions, Joe's was a whisper. High-tensile grappling lines, powered by compressed air, hissed into the night, their claws finding silent purchase on the warehouse's corrugated steel roof 60 feet up. They ascended like spiders, melting over the edge. 2 guards, left behind as a token force, were stationed by the roof access door, looking in the wrong direction, mesmerized by the firefight on the other side of the yard. Wraith and Joe moved as one. It was over in 3 seconds. No gunfire, just the thud of 2 bodies hitting the gravel roof, their throats crushed. Joe didn't look back. She sliced the lock on the access door and led her team down the steel staircase into the cavernous darkness within. The warehouse was vast enough to hold 3 football fields. It smelled of rust, sea salt, and ozone. The only light came from a single distant cluster of harsh, sodium-yellow industrial lamps, illuminating a small circle of activity in the center of the immense, black void. Joe moved through the rows of shipping containers, her team peeling off to secure the flanks. As she got closer, she could hear voices. She slid into the final shadow, her eyes adjusting. And the world stopped. It was a setup, but not the one she'd expected. Alexander Kozak was there, standing with the easy confidence of a king, a small glass of amber liquid in his hand. But he was not alone. Standing right next to him, looking completely at ease, was her CIA handler, Croft. He wasn't a prisoner. He was a partner. And between them, chained to a massive steel container, was the final piece of the nightmare. Leo. He was thin, almost skeletal. His hair was long and matted, his beard unkempt. But the worst part was his eyes. They were open, but they were dead. Hollowed out. He was a shell, a ghost in the flesh, staring at nothing. "She's here, you know," Kozak said, not to Croft but to the shadows. He took a casual sip. "She's too good to not be. Come out, ghost." Jo stepped out from behind the container, her weapon leveled, not at Kozak but at Croft. Croft actually sighed, a sound of pure bureaucratic annoyance. "You just couldn't stay dead, could you, Jo? You always had to be the overachiever." "Croft," Jo's voice was a low, dangerous rasp. You sold him. You sold us." "Sold? No." Kozak answered for him, a smug, professorial tone to his voice. "It was a trade. A gift. You see, your agency had a problem 10 years ago. An asset, Leo, who got too close to my operation in Bogota. And I had a problem, a rival who needed eliminating. Mr. Croft here," he gestured with his glass, "arranged for Leo to be misplaced during an ambush. He became my property. My Velas. My ghost assassin." Kozak stepped closer to Leo, running a hand through his filthy hair as if inspecting livestock. "He was a masterpiece of reconditioning. But he had a flaw. He was obsessed with you. It was the one piece of him we could never fully erase. And when you showed up in my city, a ghost in my backyard, well, I knew Mr. Croft had finally delivered you to me. You didn't lead me to him, Jo. You led me right back to you. You were the bait to bring him back into the fold. And now I have you both. Kozak and Croft are pure, unfiltered evil. They are partners in corruption, betrayal, and human misery. They represent a system that chews up good people and spits them out. If you're not siding with these backstabbing, manipulative tyrants, comment, "Prez for the win" right now." Kozak smiled. "And I have to thank you. By bringing your little army, you've managed to bring all my enemies to one convenient location." He nodded to Croft. "It's time. End this." Croft pulled his weapon, a standard-issue CIA Sig Sauer, and aimed it directly at Jo's heart. "It's just business, Jo. You were a loose end." "He's right," Kozak said. "But he's also wrong. He thinks this is his operation." Boom. The entire 40-foot-high set of bay doors on the east side of the warehouse exploded inward, ripped from their hinges by a tow truck. Light and noise flooded the space as Breaker and the main force of the Iron Pilgrims stormed in, a wave of leather and steel. Chaos erupted. Kozak's hidden security detail, a dozen men, opened fire from the catwalks. Wraith's team, already in position, returned fire, providing overwatch. Alexander Kozak, his composure finally shattered, threw his glass at Croft. "You fool. You said she was alone." He turned and ran, sprinting for a small side door that led to a private dock, where a speedboat, his one escape route, was waiting. Croft, panicked, turned to fire at the advancing bikers. And Jo, with pure tunnel vision clarity, saw her choice. Kozak was the head of the snake. But Croft was the betrayal. She bypassed Kozak entirely. She ignored the gunfire. She lunged, a blur of black, at Croft. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Croft saw her coming and fired, a shot that went wide in his panic. Jo hit him like a freight train. Her hand clamped onto his wrist, breaking it with an audible snap. His gun clattered. Her other hand slammed into his solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs. As he doubled over, gasping, she grabbed the back of his head and drove his face once, twice, 3 times into the concrete floor. She left him a broken, bloody, wheezing mess. She didn't even look back. She saw Kozak reach the escape door. But as he tore it open, he froze. Breaker was standing there, blocking the exit, flanked by a dozen of his largest, meanest-looking men. They weren't armed with guns. They were armed with tire irons and chains. Breaker cracked his knuckles. "The boss wants to talk to you, Mr. Kozak." "We'll wait." Jo turned. The fight was over. Kozak was trapped. Croft was broken. Only one thing was left. She walked slowly toward the container. Toward Leo. The noise, the shouting, the gunfire, it had activated him. He was no longer a hollow shell. His eyes were wide, feral, and he was struggling against his chains, snarling like an animal. He was a weapon reset to its factory settings of pure violence. "Leo," she said, her voice soft. "It's me. It's Joe." He lunged at her, the chains snapping taut, his teeth bared. He didn't know her. She was just another target. "Leo, please." She could see the flicker. Deep behind the animal rage, behind a decade of torture and brainwashing, something looked out. A flicker of confusion. Of recognition. He roared, a sound of pure agony, and with an impossible surge of strength, he snapped the chain connecting his cuffs to the wall. He was free. He lunged at her. This was the impossible choice. Kill him to save herself, or be killed by the man she once loved. She chose a third way. She wasn't a CIA agent. She wasn't a victim. She was Prez, and she would not lose her family. She didn't meet his attack. She evaded it, using his own momentum against him, a perfect Aikido pivot. As he stumbled past, she was already behind him, her arm looping under his chin, her bicep locking against his carotid. A perfect, non-lethal rear-naked choke. He fought, his strength animalistic, but he was malnourished and she had leverage. "I'm not letting you go," she whispered in his ear, her voice breaking. "I'm not leaving you. Sleep. Just sleep." He struggled for 10 seconds. Then the fight went out of him. His body went limp. She didn't let him fall. She caught his dead weight, gently lowering his unconscious body to the concrete floor. She stood up, her entire body shaking, not from fear but from the adrenaline, the grief, and the cold. She looked at the ruined warehouse, at her victorious army, at the captured Kozak, and at the bloody, whimpering form of her betrayer. She walked over to Croft, who was trying to crawl away with his broken wrist. She grabbed a zip tie from Wraith's belt, yanked Croft's hands behind his back, and secured them herself. Checkmate. Dawn was breaking over the Delaware River, painting the sky in cold shades of gray and steel. Miles from the Navy Yard, on a windswept highway overpass, Joe Harding, or the woman who had been her, stood and watched a new burner phone dissolve in a cup of industrial solvent. She had made one final call. Not to a local field office, not to a compromised regional desk, but to the private, secure, direct line of the CIA director himself. Her message was an anonymous, untraceable whisper. "Warehouse 27, Philadelphia Navy Yard. You'll find your traitor, Croft. You'll find your lost agent, Leo. And you'll find Alexander Kozak. A gift. You're welcome." When the FBI's hostage rescue team and a panicked unit of CIA loyalists stormed the warehouse, they found exactly what she'd described. It was a perfectly wrapped package. Alexander Kozak, bound, gagged, and staring in silent fury. A bloody, whimpering, and zip-tied Agent Croft. And, chained to a container for his own protection, a catatonic, non-responsive Leo. The system, faced with its own grotesque corruption, reacted with swift, silent efficiency. The bookstore barbarian narrative vanished from the 24-hour news cycle, instantly replaced by a vague, complex story of corporate espionage and a foiled terrorist plot. The charges against Joanna Harding were quietly dropped, citing newly discovered, superseding federal evidence. The second red, still cordoned off with police tape, became just another empty, boarded-up storefront. Joanna Harding, the quiet, mousy shopkeeper, had vanished. The ghost was gone. 6 months later. The wind howled, a high, thin scream, carrying a torrent of fresh snow across a remote, fortified compound high in the mountains of Wyoming. Inside, a fire roared in a stone hearth big enough to stand in. This was the heart of the Iron Pilgrims. Joe sat in a heavy leather chair, staring into the flames. She was no longer Joe. She was no longer Ghost. She was fully and finally Prez. Her expression was calm, centered, and absolute. Across from her sat Leo. He was no longer the feral, hollowed-out animal from the warehouse. He was clean-shaven, his hair cut short. He was still thin, and a deep, jagged scar traversed his temple, but he was present. His eyes, though still haunted by a decade of darkness, were clear. He was sipping hot tea, his hands steady. The CIA believed they had rescued their lost agent. They believed he had subsequently vanished from a secure debriefing facility, likely taken by Kozak's remaining forces. They had no idea the Iron Pilgrims had extracted him from under their noses 2 hours later. Leo, their rescued asset, was with his real family. He looked up from the fire and met Joe's gaze. A small, faint, but genuine smile touched his lips. It was a start. Joe smiled back, an expression no one at Langley had ever seen, unguarded, warm, and real. The CIA thought they had cleaned house. They thought the threat was neutralized. They had no idea that the real power, Prez, was now holding all the cards. She had Leo. She had the truth. And she was sitting by the fire, patiently deciding her next move on the corrupt system that had betrayed them both. Joe took down a corrupt system from the inside and the outside. She proved that real loyalty, family, is stronger than any government or corporation. If you're ready for more stories that expose the truth and tear down the liars, subscribe. Only the corrupt, the cowardly, and the content will miss what's next.